been involved uh, who's been involved in this case since 2015. So we're going to break the show into four parts. One is we're going to look at the issue before the girls travel to Syria and what could Tower Hamlets Council have done, with a specific focus on the discussion on local issues, Tower Hamlets and Tower Hamlets Council. Second part, we're going to look at what could the council have done once we've discovered that the girls have gone to Syria. Could they have done anything differently? I know there's a debate around serious case reviews, etc., and we'll go into that. And then after the break, third section, we're going to discuss the issue about Shamima's citizenship. I know the mayor, I've just recently informed, the mayor has made a statement on it, but could the council have done something about it? I know there's different views on it. It's interesting. It seems to polarize people. We're going to go into that discussion. And on the final segment, after the break, on the after 7:45, Andrew and I will just sort of like dissect the discussion and give our views on what we've heard. So join us after the break, where we kick off with the first section with Tasneem, where we talk about what could Tower Hamlets Council have done to basically prevent the girls from going to Syria, and is the Prevent program working? Now we're off to a break. Hi everyone, welcome back. Welcome back to the show with myself, Councillor Puru, with co-host Councillor Andrew Wood. So today we'll be talking about the Shamima Begum case, a case that's sort of like divided a lot of opinions in Tower Hamlets of a local girl, Shamima, who was born here, who travelled to Syria, got involved with or got mixed up with ISIS. And now there's the government has stripped her of her citizenship, and there was a recent case where she wasn't allowed to return to apply to fight for her citizenship to be restored. So there's a lot of confusion. There's a lot of people asking questions as to what happened, how it happened, whether we could avoid these things happening again. So we're joined today by Tasneem Akanji, a lawyer who's been involved in this matter since 2015. And we're going to just go through that. So the first section is, what could have, and the first section we're going to discuss the questions. What could Tower Hamlets Council have done to prevent this from happening? And linked to that is the Prevent program working. So I'll move over to Andrew. Andrew, do you want to just, I know we both had discussions on this. This case wasn't isolated. There were other cases in that school. Is that correct?
I think his microphone might be off.
Andrew, I think your mic. No. So what I'll do is I'll go to Tasneem, and while Andrew works out as well. So Tasneem, do you want to answer that question?
Well, before you can say what can someone do about a problem, you have to identify whether A, there is a problem, and B, what did the relevant authorities know about the nature of the problem before it metastasized into this situation of a number of girls leaving Syria. So really the sort of story starts with a girl called Shamima Begum. Yeah, not Shamima Begum. There are two, so they're phonetically similar but spelled differently, and they're not related. Now, Shamima Begum, she left to Syria in December 2014. She was close friends with Shamima, Khadija Sultana, Amira Abbasi, and a number of other girls. So having left in 2014, the school became aware of that because the counterterrorism police were involved. They were involved with her family, father, and were trying to take it beyond just a missing person scenario and take it into a full-blown investigation. So the school had full knowledge that Shamina Begum had gone over to Syria in 2014. Part of that investigation process meant that questions were asked around, well, who's this girl, Shamina Begum, and who are her friends, her close friends, and then her wider friends. And the school helped identify a cadre of schoolgirls, including the 3 that eventually left, and passed that information on to police. The police then decided that they would question this cohort, and they did so during January and February of 2015. They did so without the knowledge of the parents. The parents weren't told that their own children were being questioned by police. The school stepped in actually to occupy the role as appropriate adult. They basically stepped in as if they were the parents, and that there's a big question mark as to whether that was in any way appropriate. But somewhere down the line, when these girls have been questioned, the police suddenly realized that actually, under the rules that they work under, they ought to really inform the parents of these girls that they're being questioned, particularly the fact that they're being questioned in a school environment by police. So they formulated some letters, and on school premises, the police officers handed those letters to the girls to give to their parents. Not a single one of those letters got to the parents at all. And very soon after that, the 3 girls, that's Shamima Begum, Khadija Sultana, and Amira Abbas, they formed a plan to go over to Syria, and they managed to do that, basically, under the nose of the school and the police as well. So what was the problem there, really? Where was the interventions possible? And the reason why this case is so absolutely shocking is because it was entirely foreseeable that there's a cohort of girls who are connected to the first December girl who are at risk. And the reason we know that is because they were being questioned. They were around a person who's been radicalized. And in terms of the literature that's out there, the academic literature, there is really only one factor that can tell you whether someone's at risk or not, and it's called the Piper effect. And it's simply, has your friend gone? There's an excellent report by Davos called The Edge of Violence. It's a very deep study over a number of different cases across Germany, Canada, UK, and that's what it says. It says if somebody goes, then you've got to watch out for their friends, because maybe their friends will go. Even Mr. Udin, who is the father of Shamina Begum, the first girl, he has publicly said he told the school and the police officers involved in his daughter's disappearance that they should keep an eye on these girls, the 3 that eventually left, because they were so close. So where you've got direct notice being given by parents, involvement by the police in these girls in school premises, then there is certainly a failure there to safeguard them, because the idea that you give a letter to the girls themselves, people you're questioning themselves, to hand to their parents, well, schools don't do that. If your child's naughty at school, you'll get a text message because the school doesn't trust the kid to inform their parents that they're involved in something being naughty, or that they haven't done their homework, or they call the parents. But in this case, we didn't even meet the standards that schools will employ for detention, let alone counterterrorism internationally.
So I'll just move over to Andrew. Andrew, you were a counsellor at the time. So were you aware of the first case and also the subsequent cases? When were you aware as a counsellor?
So I've been a counsellor since May 2014. So during this period of time, I've been on the Overview and Scrutiny Committee since about 2017, and on the Children's Education Scrutiny Subcommittee since it was established, but that was more recently, a couple of years ago. And to be honest, nearly all of my information about these cases comes from external sources. So actually, probably the most informative piece of information for me was I bought last year a very good book called Guest House for Young Widows Among the Women of ISIS. And that's really the first time that as a counsellor I actually understood, well, I think I knew lots of stuff before then, but it was the first time that it was kind of like I had a neatly packaged explanation of the family's background and some of the issues. And I think this is one of the concerns that I have. I've been a counsellor for almost 7 years now. I'm getting my information from external sources, and we've never really properly debated these issues. within the council and what we do about it, and how the girls got radicalized, and what was the responsibility of the council, and what do we do to stop it in future, and what were the lessons learned. I have seen some evidence within schools about internet access and sort of protocols being changed within schools. But a lot of pupils at secondary school level have their own smartphones, so we don't have any control over that side of things.
Okay.
I mean, that book, Guest House for Travelers, that book's written by Azde Movavi. She wrote that all by herself with no help at all. And what she did was to go and chase down these sort of examples of cases and actually speak to the family. Now, that is a solitary journalist with limited funds who's gone out to collect information that might be helpful to all of us, really, about the circumstances around this. An individual's done that. And we have an entire council, Tower Hamlets Council, where this problem has expressed itself in large numbers. And it's got a budget, I think, in north of 700 million, really, sitting in reserve slush funds. It's got a staff, and it has a problem with radicalization within its own borough. And beyond that, we are the 5th largest economy in the world. We still, I'm not sure after we do our accounts post-Brexit where we are, but at the moment there we are. And we have one of the most mature security services and police forces dating back to the 17th century. Our budgets have been diverted massively to counter-terrorism for the last 20 years, but neither the state, the British government, across different governments themselves, complexion of government, nor the Tower Hamlets Council have managed to do or be as helpful as a single journalist in the course of 1 year.
Well, that's it. So it's never been brought up in overview and scrutiny, Andrew, or
so when I've been in attendance, no. As a reminder, so also just to sort of, there's about 2,500 staff working children's services in total. I've had a quick look at it a couple of days ago. So there's lots of staff. I think the other point as well is kind of came up again is that Tower Hamlets Council failed its Ofsted Children's Services inspection in 2017 in April of that year. And all of these issues kind of came up again, and the council kind of got very defensive about it, and our attempts to try and find out more kind of got blocked. To be fair to the council, they did recover well. They put the resources in, and things got a lot better. But Ofsted in April 2017 kind of found that basically some children were in danger from some of the practices of the council. So again, I don't think sort of lessons were learned from some of these early. I mean, there's slightly different issues and different causes, but I don't think we learned the lessons despite all the resources that we had. And I still don't think we have, because as we've just been discussing, our main source of information, certainly for me, has been a book that I myself bought last year.
I don't even recall a debate. I've been a councillor since 2018, and this issue's been bubbling away. Even when I became a councillor, it hasn't been fully debated in the council chamber. There hasn't been any reports to cabinet on this, as far as I know. It seems like there's a wall of silence over it, and some people were hoping that when Shamima was allowed to stand trial in the UK, that a lot of the facts would come out, but it seems we've been denied that, and it looks like we'll have to be much more proactive. So we're going to go into a break now. After the break, we're going to discuss what could Tower Hamlets Council have done, or other public bodies have done locally, once it was discovered that the girls have left school and gone abroad. So join us after the break to basically discuss that second section. What could we have done after we found out that Shamima and her friends have left for Syria? Thank you.
সব মিলে কাজটা ছেড়ে রিল্যাক্স রেডিও শুনি आओ सब मिले काजटा छेड़े रिलैक्स रेडियो শুনি রিল্যাক্স রেডিওতে প্রতিদিন শোনা যায় বাংলার প্রতিধ্বনি রিল্যাক্স রেডিও শুনি রিল্যাক্স রেডিও শুনি
Relax Radio.
Hi everyone, welcome back to the Politic Show with myself, Councillor Puru, co-host Councillor Andrew Wood. So today we're joined by Tasneem Akinji, a lawyer who's been involved in the Shamima Begum case, and we before the break we discussed what could have happened, what could Tower Hamlets or other public bodies have done to prevent Shamima and her friends from going abroad to Syria. In this section we're going to discuss, now that we've discovered that Shamima and her friends have gone abroad, what could Tower Hamlets Council, other public bodies have done proactively to get them back, or to learn and prevent other girls from having the same fate as them. So Tasneem, that's when you sort of like got involved 2015. From that experience, what's your opinion of the reaction or the response from public bodies, especially local ones here?
Right. So, I mean, I got involved after a very serious mistake had been made, really. And the mistake was to televise this incident nationally. So it was the police who encouraged the families to try to go on the BBC and to say, put a call out for their girls to come back home, really. By that stage, though, they knew that they'd already boarded a flight to Turkey, not the families, but the police, and that they were already in Turkey. Now, the difficulty here is that in any situation like this, I will say that there are organizations and institutions populated by normal people like you and I, and they will, those people are not insensitive to the plight of young children going abroad and being caught up in this. But the difficulty is that where something becomes a high-profile matter, then those people are very limited in what they can do and how they interpret the rules that they work under. So in any situation where the security services are involved, there is a lot of latitude if there isn't a massive publicity event behind it in order to help. So though we found that afterwards, when we tried to use our normal sort of approach channels really for this sort of situation, that they were much more resistant to bending the rules or playing with one interpretation of the rules than otherwise would have been the case. And that was a serious failing there by the police really on the issue, particularly when they knew where they were, because really the only thing that could have been done at that point was to quickly get on the phone with the police, speak to their counterparts in Turkey, and effectively try and cooperate with as much information flow as possible and get the Turks mobilized to try and identify where they were. That was a critical time, and it was unfortunate the way it fell.
And moving on, after the fact, there's been a lot of debate around serious case reviews or the lack of not doing a serious case review. I've noticed one of the viewers has put in a comment that the issues around serious case review is actually raised in the Ofsted report about Tower Hamlets. Tasneem, do you want to just, before I move on to Andrew, do you want to just talk about that? What was your, did you ask for that?
Yeah, so a serious case review really is an examination really of the different parties involved in a serious situation. In this case, police, school, local authority, and maybe social services. But it examines where there were failures, where there was a failure, and where that blame is apportioned. It's not really about apportioning blame. It's more about finding where is there a problem, can we fix it? Now that is triggered usually when a child has died, or there's some evidence of abuse or neglect, and there's been some serious harm. Serious harm suspected. Now, where that takes place in the context of somebody who's been radicalized, well, in other scenarios where the local authorities do get involved, where they prevent or notified of a family that might be involved in some radicalization, then the social services will often get involved, and they'll say, look, this radicalization that is emotional abuse, a definition of emotional abuse, and therefore they then act by trying to get the children into the family courts, make them wards of court to protect them from the influences of maybe radicalized parents. So it's well known that radicalization by councils, it's well known that radicalization constitutes emotional abuse, and that can constitute serious harm, and therefore a serious case review should be triggered in any of these circumstances. Now that wasn't done. We asked the Tower Hamlets Council, it was under John Biggs at the time, repeatedly to undertake a serious case review. Originally, we were met with silence. I then made an accusation directly in writing that John Biggs was either involved in a cover-up or in order to avoid the discovery of neglect with respect to this case. He responded by stating that a goal group meeting had taken place, which is usually what a police will set up, and that in that goal group meeting, a serious case review was considered and was decided wasn't necessary. My understanding of parties who were in that goal group meeting was no such issue was tabled. Recently, Mr. Biggs has said that he's received legal advice that suggests that a serious case review didn't meet the criteria for that to take place, really. And we'd be most interested to see that legal advice.
And Andrew, do you want to come in on that? Because I know that there have been interventions to prevent other girls from going to Syria. So some lessons have been learned, but the issue around a serious case review, why are we not calling a serious case review? And I just wanted you to comment on what you've heard based on your experience being there at the council during this time.
So I know this issue has been raised within the council as well as by myself in public and in private meetings. I know Councillor Rabina Khan has done the same. When I was leader of the opposition, I also would have meetings with the Director of Children's Services. So I'm pretty sure at some point we discussed this issue, because we actually did discuss some other cases. So I do have some information about, some other families that did come back from Syria. I also know, not directly, but indirectly, that, there were conversations with the security services. And I think one of the problems with this is, naturally in children's services, there is the need to protect the privacy of children. Though in this case, obviously, the girls have, now over the age of 18, and that really makes it really difficult to have these kind of conversations. And I think the other part of the problem is that you would normally do a serious case review when a child dies. And the problem is that we believe some of these girls are now dead, but there is no direct evidence of that as yet. So until we have direct evidence that they died, and of course may depend on the age of when they died, there is no formal trigger for a serious case review. But the reason why you do this is to learn lessons. And part of the problem is that there are lots of people involved in this, the school, the police, social services and others as well. And I know the relationships between the school, because it was an academy at that point. Social services were not great during that period of time for some other reasons. But for us, the Overview and Scrutiny Committee, it's really important that we see evidence that the council has learnt lessons from its mistakes in the past. And that's normally best done through a serious case review, because then you can see it documented, it's sort of led by an external person. And it may be they've learnt lessons, but I have no evidence of that as a councillor and a member of Overview and Scrutiny Committee.
Well, Andrew, I just want to come back on that. I know the format has changed, legislation or rules have changed behind serious case review. Can we still have a serious case review, in your opinion? Because people are asking for that. I've been on social media, I've been involved in discussions. There's the call for a serious case review is now becoming louder due to the fact that we won't be able to know the facts around Shamima's case, because she won't be allowed to enter this country. So how do we learn the lessons? So can we call a serious case review now, Andrew, in your opinion?
So I think it's the terminology has changed and the process have changed, but it's still fundamentally the same process. It's a way of trying to learn lessons from the past. And one of the arguments, so I'm not particularly keen that Shamima Begum return to the UK, to be completely honest, but one of the arguments of actually bringing her back to the UK is then the ability to interview her and talk to her and actually understand what happened to her, which then may explain what happened to the others as well. And I think that is one of the justifications for her return, is that we would learn lessons. But it's only worth doing that if we actually do learn some lessons. And so far, my experience has been is that, you know, we wouldn't pick up that opportunity. Maybe the security services would do, but it wouldn't filter down to us at the council or into the public domain.
Taz, I just want to come back to you. Do you think lessons have been learned? You've been involved since 2015. After the fact, what you're saying is you've been stonewalled in asking for answers to pertinent questions. The family has been stonewalled. What's your opinion? Do we need a case review? Have lessons been learned? It's not going to come out in a court of law now.
Well, no, I mean, in terms of Shamima's case, look, when she left, there were still 9 other girls who were in school, and the council did intervene. You know, the council then went in and they applied to court to make them wards of court, which did happen. So the problem there was, well, there were 2 tranches of people. There was the first girl in 2014, then there were 3 girls, all from the same school, who successfully managed to evade, you know, detection and go over to Syria. It's only then that the council then decided that actually maybe we ought to get involved and at least put a stop to anyone else trying to go. So, well, what lessons does one need to learn? Well, a very simple one was, if there's a risk around a particular cadre of school children, you should tell their parents to take their passports away, or at least, you know, lock their passports up. It's a very simple step to do. It doesn't cost the UK taxpayer any money to do that, really. So did that happen in other cases? From other cases that I'm aware of, no. And it's one of the issues is how, because these things are police investigation led, they're sort of archaeological studies rather than actually proactive studies, where the police get involved and say, right, something horrible's happened, let's see who's to blame, instead of saying, let's prevent something horrible and let's see who we can work with in order to prevent that happening. And that may be one of the problems around the abdication of responsibility when there's a police investigation. So when counterterrorism police come into the scene, apparently it seems that our councils and our schools forget about their duties. They completely forget that they still remain in a position where they owe a duty to these kids regardless of who else is involved. And they just take the lead by the police. Now, the police, of course, they have a duty of care, but it's nowhere at the standard of what the duty of care that councils and schools are meant to adhere to. And their interest is not about the individual themselves. Their interest is in detecting crime, gathering evidence, and finding a conviction. So these are opposite duties that different organizations have, and these need to be balanced properly. And more importantly, the councils and the schools need to assert their responsibility and duties even when the police are involved.
I just want to read out a comment before we go into a break. A comment from Amy. Also, there seems to have been systematic issues when completing serious case reviews. 2017 Ofsted highlights this. The council has still not addressed the issue appropriately. Other SES have not been completed for children who met the criteria for a serious case review in Tower Hamlets. The mayor has been approaching regarding these serious safeguarding on multiple occasions. There are still issues in SCRs being completed. The Bethnal Green girls situation met the working together to safe. Andrew, do you want to just quickly comment on that before we move off to a break?
Yes, I mean, so actually that's a good comment, because one of the problems is as councillors on the Overview and Scrutiny Committee, we only see serious case reviews at the end of the process. And unless we read the newspapers and know that a child died, for example, there's not, information to us about the other cases out there. So just because we see a serious case review doesn't mean that we know actually that there were others out there that we should be aware of as well. And then the other problem we've had as well is the timeliness of some of these things is, by the time we see these things, it's like 2-3 years later, and therefore the opportunity to learn lessons is also 2 or 3 years late as well.
Cool. So we're gonna move off to a break now. After the break, we're gonna discuss the citizenship issue around Shamima. Again, could Tower Hamlets Council, other local authorities, be more proactive about it. So join us after the break. We're just gonna go. Hi everyone, welcome back to the third section of the show on the Shamima Begum, where I'm Councillor Puru, joined by my co-host Councillor Andrew Rood, and today we're joined by Tasneem Akinji, a lawyer who's been involved in the Shamima Begum case since 2015. So in this section we're going to talk about the issues around her citizenship being stripped and what could we have done locally as public institutions. Could we have given a view? There are some legal issues around her children who have now passed away. So I'm just going to pass it over to Tasneem. Now, so like Shamima had her citizenship stripped. What could Tower Hamlets Council have done in that before it went to court, for example, in your view?
Yeah, I'd just like to come in.
Yeah.
Just before we get to that, Andrew, you raised an important point about, knowledge of death. Yeah, how do we know that somebody in a war zone has died, and whether that actually triggers a serious case review? And I think it harks to the comment that was on the screen earlier. In 2017, there was a serious case review in Brighton and Hove Council in very similar circumstances to the ones that we find ourselves in, where a couple of children from a family went over to Libya, I think that was, and were killed. There was no death certificate, but the council decided that it wanted to learn lessons from that, and so conducted a serious case review in any event. That's siblings W and X. So, that's a council that's got out of his way to try and learn lessons in very similar circumstances.
Cool. So I've got another comment. A child safeguarding practice review is decided by government guidelines in working together with children. The case still meets the threshold regardless of what John Biggs says. But just moving on, now Shamima had her citizenship stripped. I know, so like, obviously the family want her back, and a lot of people who know her or members of the community wanted her back. Could anything have happened? Could Tower Hamlets Council have done anything, especially when there were children involved, her children?
Well, I think the issue there is that, look, she was stripped by the Home Secretary in particular circumstances. Now, there have been people who've gone over to Syria and they've come back with, a very large majority have come back just before her, men as well who were fighters, and nobody did anything about it. And there have actually been people who've come back since Shamima Begum. There's a young woman who's been returned back to the UK. It's just Shamima Begum herself seems to be an iconoclast issue. And it's one that a Home Secretary has looked into. the Home Secretary had made a decision, and that was not anything to do with any council regulations or rules. That was to do with the British Nationality Act and an assessment. That assessment was, that she's not conducive to the public good, and that his assessment was that she wouldn't be left stateless should her British citizenship be taken away. So there's lots of arguments around that, but they have little nexus with the council itself. However, had the council conducted a serious case review, and back in 2015, we would have had the results of that before she even appeared in a camp. We would have learned lessons, but also we would have seen in black and white through an independent review just what the failings of our various organizations were and how they contributed to a child making a decision to get or being groomed to go to another war zone. That would factor quite highly in terms of state culpability around whether that decision was proportionate.
Understood. So basically, if we had all the information, then what you're saying is the Home Secretary might have taken a different decision, a different risk assessment, and it could have been challenged. Is that what you're saying? Because there's a lack of information, for example, from a serious case review, you're saying that it actually impacted on the decision to strip her of her nationality, because my understanding is they carried out a risk assessment, and the risk assessment said she shouldn't be back in the country, and it's much more difficult to challenge it because there's no comparison as to the assessment made by the Home Secretary to any local assessments. Is that what you're saying? And I'll just move after your comment. I'll let
where we are at the moment is that Shamima Begum has no ability to communicate with her lawyers in any effective manner whatsoever. She doesn't know in any timely fashion what a court has said. There are no documents she has around the case, and she cannot communicate her evidence to the court back, really. So in that total lacuna of any evidence from her side, the argument was made that that's not an effective appeal process. But had we had some evidence from an inquiry or a serious case review, at least that could have been forwarded to show, hold on, we can't have failed as a state to protect Shamima Begum and then rely on our own failure and rely on our own lack of interest in discovering our failure or evidencing our failure to actually keep this woman out of the country for fear that she may talk about things that would point out those failures.
And Andrew, do you want to come in on this?
No, that's a really good point, actually, because obviously even today people are arguing about degrees of guilt and all the rest of it. But if we had done a serious case review, and and it had proven that she was seriously groomed, and there were family issues and issues with her mother and all the rest of it, and also again the information I read from that book may have cast her decision to go in a potentially different light, and therefore may have influenced the Home Secretary's decision, because we don't know what information that he acted upon when he made that decision. And I think the other interesting point as well is that if organisations fail, they tend not to want to publicise those failures, and again that is also having an impact as well on her case, I suspect.
I mean, it is a bit like asking Harold Shipman to write a review about his own practice, but in the reason why the reason why it's important is because eventually statistics caught up with Harold Shipman and discovered he was murdering his patients, and something was done. But that was an external review of Harold Shipman and his practice, not an internal one, and that's why these things are so important.
Gotcha. Where do we go next? And so like Andrew, where do we go next with this? Especially with the citizenship, do you feel that Tower Hamlets should carry out an investigation and publish it to assist?
So, I mean, one of the good things is that we have a new director of children's services who arrived a few months ago, so completely blank piece of paper from that perspective. So I haven't spoken to him about this, but maybe he might be more willing to look at some of these historical issues because he wasn't involved with them. So that may be worth re-asking that question about the serious case review with him, or whatever it's called now. because the other point is actually a lot of staff have moved on. So, and that's the other concern I have about this process, is that in terms of learning lessons, if we're dependent on staff having been there and learned the lessons, but they then leave the council, where is that institutional knowledge about where we failed in the past, which is another justification for the serious case reviews, because it puts it in black and white that we can then share with people. So yeah, it may be worth us as a council asking again that question, given that this is still a live issue.
I want to. My experience is that this kind of like goes beyond Shamima or the issues of counter-terrorism. There seems to be some kind of endemic kind of underlying problem, the way the council has been dealing with, say, youth offenders in general. I work in the criminal justice system. There's a high level of youth offending in our borough from children of certain demographics. That's also shown in the national statistics as well. It seems like 40% of all young offenders who are incarcerated come from BAME background. That's quite a large number. But it just from, I know there was an overview and scrutiny report or some kind of report where it showed that this problem is much wider, that extends to Yacht, our youth offending team, and other children's services aspect of it. It seems like we can learn lessons quite systematically. It's much wider than this narrow issue of children going to Syria. Andrew, do you want to come back on that?
Well, I mean, obviously there is a wider issue about why children get groomed to do certain things. So selling drugs is probably the most critical issue that we've got. County lines, we had a child recently that was kind of was basically removed from Tower Hamlets and was taken somewhere else to sell drugs, and that person was then prosecuted, and I wasn't particularly happy with the sentence. But are we learning lessons from county lines in terms of how the children are groomed? And again, as a member of Overview and Scrutiny Committee, I'm not really sure. I'm sure within Children's Services, I know there's a separate team that looking at this. But again, where is the public evidence in the public domain that we are learning lessons and diverting the next generation children away from selling drugs or being involved in community lines?
Taz, before we go to the break, any final words from you, any final reflection, and where would you recommend? There's a lot of people agitated by this. Social media is divided, but there's a lot of people that are passionate about this. A lot of people saying if this could happen to Shamima, it could happen to anybody here. A decision taken by undemocratic, it's all like on the recommendation of non-elected officials. I've got a comment here. I hope Shamima Begum can return to the UK, as she was a British citizen at the end of the day. She should stand trial so we can establish the truth and sentence accordingly. I hope she has reformed and can be a force of good. So Taz, over to you.
Well, look, I mean, the Shamima Begum's, quite a divisive topic, really. Anywhere you look, if you look in the Daily Mail or the national media, you'll see voices on one side, voices on another, equally balanced. And if you look even within the government and the actual cabinet itself, you've got the Priti Patels and the Sajid Javeds on one side, and then you've got the Rees Moggs, rather surprisingly, on the other, who are asserting that she should return. So, it's divided the entire country. There's a couple of reasons for this. One is that different people look at the situation through different lenses. Some people are looking at Shamima Begum's situation and not really thinking about her. They're thinking about the wider issues. What is citizenship? Can it be taken away? Is there now a two-tier system of citizenship? If your parents come from a different country, does that mean your British citizenship, even if you're born here, is of a different quality and value? So that's what one set of people are looking at the wider issues. The other side of people are looking at just Shamima Begum. What does she look like on TV as an X Factor contestant? And how do they feel towards her, really? Yeah. So there are different groups are looking at two different things. And then beyond that, other people are looking at it in a compassionate way. It's a young girl, 15 years old, groomed, taken over somewhere. And others are looking at it as a woman who's part of the evil ISIS. So it's got different levels of looking at things. One of my deep concerns is that the average reading age for the general public in the UK is 80 years old. only 8, educated people at the level of sort of 16 years old. So when you have a public that looks at debate in terms of what a primary school child would, that is why we end up with this sort of very divisive situation with little nuance, because that's how 8-year-olds look at anything. Right? You're on my side or you're on their side. And we see this in sort of the body politic today, really quite basic, blunt, and primary school level discourse. So I think we've got lots of problems here, and fundamental problems, and we really need to shake ourselves as a people and say, look, these things are actually relatively complicated. They need proper looking at and a balancing of things that are just beyond the 2-minute clickbait of what you think of somebody because of what they look like or what they say.
Cool. So we're gonna go off to a break now. Taz, I know you have to go, but feel free if you want to stick around.
Yeah.
Final section, Andrew and I just going to reflect on what's been said and give our views on it. So join us after the break. We're just going to go to a break now for the final section. Well, welcome back, everyone, to the weekly Politics Show. Myself, Councillor Puru, co-hosted by Councillor Andrew Wood. We earlier on in the studio we had Taz. Taz is still with us, so I just want to do a bit of reflection. Before me and Andrew come in, since you're here, Taz, do you want to just give your testing? Do you want to give just a reflection of what this case says about the state of the nation, for example, of the UK, and also the state of Tower Hamlets as a council, and where do we go from here?
Well, I mean, it's pretty troubling. A lot of black and ethnic minority people are quite concerned about the precedent this sets, really, in terms of citizenship stripping. To be fair, citizenship stripping has been a possibility in UK law since 2002. However, it's been very parsimoniously used, never going above double digits in terms of per year for only the most extreme people. That was only up until 2019 to 2020. This government then pushed it out, so it involved 119 people in 1 year. So it's been converted from a minority scenario, a very rare situation, into something that's now being used on a larger class of people. Now, the reason that's most troubling is because on Friday last week, when the decision came out about Shamima's citizenship being stripped and her inability to come back to the UK, yesterday on Talk Radio 5, there were calls for stripping Prince Harry and Meghan Markle of their citizenship because of the negativity towards Meghan Markle and what have you. Now we've moved into French Revolution territory within the spirit of a weekend over one of the princes of Britain, because that tool is now on the table to be used against pretty much anyone. And it's not just usable in the context of counterterrorism. The actual test for whether you strip somebody of citizenship is whether they're conducive to the public good or not. Now, if you flagellate in a lift, that's not conducive to the public good of the lift. So that's the test we're actually talking about. We need to be quite concerned about how easily this law can be rolled out for entire classes of people.
And any reflections on Tower Hamlets, council?
Well, I wouldn't by choice is educated there. There's a risk there, isn't there? really. And there's no, no lessons. Look, Shamim Begum and her friends who went over. This case is the worst case of child radicalization in the Western Hemisphere. Forget England or France or even America. In the Western Hemisphere, there's never been this number of kids affected. In 5 years, we've done nothing at all to look at how and why this has happened. Nothing. That's really quite worrying.
Cool. Andrew, do you want to come in with your reflection of what you've heard and where we go from here?
Yes, I mean, as I said earlier, so from a purely personal kind of selfish viewpoint, I prefer her not to return. I think we've got enough problems in Tower Hamlets, and I'm sure the council would also like that as well, because I think I mentioned very briefly earlier, I mean, people have returned from Syria, including children, and I know the councillors are doing lots of work with those families and sort of trying to make sure the children are protected and all the rest of it. If her children had survived, then I would support her returning, because I think that's the right thing for her children, but B, one of the things I am very concerned about is that we have a whole generation of children in Syrian camps right now who have links to the West, who are growing up in really desperate situations in refugee camps. And what happens when they reach the ages of 18? What are they going to do? And I'd much rather those children were back in the UK kind of being looked after and monitored than in Syria. But in this case, her children did die. But as a democratic, law-based society, obviously the Home Secretary's made his decision. And I'm really glad that we live in a society where actually it's the judges are going to be making this decision based on the evidence and the laws. And actually my working assumption, and I'm not a lawyer and I'm not an expert in this area as well, and I was slightly surprised by the most recent verdict, is actually I assumed that the judges would say, yes, she's a British citizen and she has to return to the UK. And that would be the right solution, because it then proves that our laws protect all of us. But we'll see whether that's the case or not.
It's my reflection is just following the social media posts. I did a post on this show, I think in the morning on Facebook. It's had over 12,000 views, and it's been commented on, and it's quite heated comments on various Facebook groups. Opinion seems to be polarized on this, and it reflects the mood here. I just want to give my point is that it's kind of worrying to me. I kind of grew up where we in the assumption that we lived in a liberal democracy where certain rights are inalienable, that the state can't take away those rights. And working in the criminal justice system, you see that on a daily basis, where people have the right to a fair trial. If they can't afford a lawyer, they're given a lawyer, they're given all opportunities, etc., to ensure that they have a fair trial and it's adjudicated upon. It seems worrying that there seems to be a shift away from that to a much more what they call an illiberal democracy or representative democracy, where rights are up for negotiation, where rights are basically based on consensus. And if the political powers decide that there's an exception to the rule, then there's an exception and there's nothing to do that. And that basically fundamentally question the direction we're going in this country. We assume that we're going in a certain direction and other countries are following on that. It seems like a regressive step. And I find it kind of troubling that you have the Home Secretary made the decision, but he made the decision on the recommendation of unelected officials. None of us could see that evidence, could see that recommendation. We can't challenge it, etc. It can't be challenged. It's now not going to be challenged in a court of law either. And it just seems to be a step towards authoritarianism, and especially troubling as minorities, where Shamima has been painted as a bogey woman figure, a hate figure, and as painted as another sort of vision. Instead of looking at the facts, people are just reacting to that. And yes, I'm going to be a bit more controversial now. Yes, ISIS are a fascist group. They do have a sort of like a fascist type ideology. But if you look at Western Europe, we went through a Second World War. People who did heinous crimes. They were put on trial. Some were executed in the Nuremberg trials, but other people were rehabilitated as well. So there was there was due process, and it seems that for whatever, and that in that conflict, millions of people died in that conflict. I'm not saying that ISIS are less terrible or anything like that. What I'm saying is, if we have the historical precedent to basically bring people to trial for the most heinous of crimes, then Shamima should have her day in court as well, and if necessary, be rehabilitated. Does anyone want to come back on that controversial point?
Well, I mean, the thing is that what's the crime?
Yeah.
There isn't actually an accusation of any crime. So we're in a bizarre situation where the Home Secretary has an assessment that she may be of some risk to the United Kingdom. But at the same time, we have the brother of Salman Abedi. This is a guy who was a British citizen, who was moved to Libya and was involved in an actual serious plot which killed a large number of people in Manchester. Now, at the same sort of time where Shamima Begum's, the Home Secretary, is blocking Shamima Begum from coming, the British government spending treasure and effort to overcome difficulties in extradition from Libya to make sure that this guy is brought and facing the UK to face trial, which he did, and was then convicted of multiple murders, serving 50 plus years in prison. So on any metric, if you compare Shamima Begum with the brother of Salman Abedi, I mean, really, I don't think any of us or anyone would dare to suggest that she's more dangerous than Abedi, really. But yet, the complete opposite has been done, really.
Any final thoughts, Andrew, especially on the serious case review? Are you going to call for that overview scrutiny and in the council?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I know in terms of social media, comments have been divided, and there's also a third strand of people, which is, oh, we don't want to hear any more about this. It's too difficult, and it's very divisive as well. But I come back to the point is, the point of overview and scrutiny is to learn lessons to inform future decisions and future actions of the council. And I still don't think we've learned the lesson. And given that this is back in the news again, I think now is a good time to be sort of asking these questions again, given that I think we can almost certainly assume that some of these girls are now dead.
Well, hopefully members of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee are watching this. I know we were yesterday in the budget where everybody was high-fiving themselves over holding the executive mayor to account. So guys, if you're listening, this is another issue that you could hold the executive mayor to account as backbenchers, and you could write as many open letters as you want on this one. But yeah, I think there's much work to be done, and I think moving on, lessons need to be learned, and we need to bring everything out in the open, shed more light, remove the heat, so we can learn lessons and actually do justice for everyone involved, including Shamima Begum. So I'll end on this note, but I just want to say thanks for coming on the show, Taz. Really appreciate it, because there are a lot of people, a lot of questions being asked, and it's actually been informative for me as well. And if this issue develops, we look forward to bringing you on for another show just to get your views. But definitely, I think people are motivated to bring this forward on all sides of the political spectrum. And let's see if we could get to the bottom of it as to what happened. But thanks for watching, and I just want to say thank you for our listeners as well, and the comments as well. And we'll end the show on this, and enjoy the weekend, and look forward to the next Friday weekly Politic Show with myself, Councillor Puru, Miah, and co-host Councillor Andrew Wood. But thank you everyone for watching. Thank you very much. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.